Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel The Commerce Desk. My name is Yuvraj. Today we are going to study one of the most mysterious, atmospheric, and meaningful short stories in the ISC syllabus, Indigo by Satyajit Ray. This is not just a ghost story, and it is not just a story about a journey. It is a story that combines suspense, fear, history, colonial exploitation, psychological tension, and supernatural mystery. At first, the story looks simple. A young man named Aniruddha Bose decides to travel to Damka by car. But during that journey, strange things happen, and he ends up experiencing something so unusual that it connects him to the dark colonial past of India. The story becomes both frightening and deeply meaningful. In this video, I will explain the full story in a detailed, exam friendly way. I will cover the plot step by step, the setting, the characters, the journey, the supernatural elements, the historical background of indigo cultivation, the symbols, the themes, and the significance of the ending. By the end, you will feel confident enough to write a strong exam answer without needing to check the textbook again. So let us begin. The story is narrated at the first person by Aniruddha Bose. He is a 29-year-old bachelor who lives in Calcutta. He works in an advertising agency, which means he has a practical, modern job. But he is not only a business or office worker in the ordinary sense. He also likes to write stories in his spare time. This detail is important because it shows that Aniruddha is intelligent, thoughtful, and imaginative. He is not a person who blindly accepts everything. He is educated, curious, and interested in ideas. In particular, he has been reading about the history of indigo plantations in 19th century Bengal and Bihar. He has become deeply interested in how British planters exploited Indian peasants and forced them to grow indigo under unfair conditions. This background matters because it prepares the reader for the events that follow. His mind is already full of thoughts about indigo, colonial cruelty, and the suffering of peasants. So, when he later enters an old bungalow connected with indigo, the connection feels even more powerful. Satyajit Ray makes the narrator realistic first, so the supernatural experience later seems even more shocking. But inside Aniruddha, there is another side, the side of the writer, the thinker, the reader of history. This contrast between his professional life and his inner interest make him a layered character. He is not someone trapped in one fixed identity. He belongs to the modern world, but he is mentally drawn towards the past. That becomes very important later because the story itself is about the past suddenly entering the present. Aniruddha decides to take leave from his work and drive to Dumka to visit his friend Pramod. Pramod was his childhood friend from his hometown, which he lived in his childhood at Mongir, Bihar. At first, this seems like a normal holiday trip. He is driving alone and he has planned the journey carefully. He wants to enjoy the drive and reach his destination in time. But before the journey begins, there is already an interruption. An old family friend visits him and delays his departure. This delay may seem small, but in the structure of the story, it is very important. It pushes the journey forward and makes him start later than planned. In stories like this, small delays often become meaningful because they separate the ground for a different kind of event. Then, just as he is getting ready to leave, his neighbor Bhola Babu stops him and advises him that for such a long journey, he should arrange for a driver. This is one of the most important warnings in the story. Bhola Babu's advice is practical and sensible, but Aniruddha does not take it seriously. This movement is important for two reasons. First, it adds realism to the story because people often ignore advice when they feel confident. Second, it creates dramatic irony. The reader later understands that Bhola Babu was right all along. After the delay and interruption, Aniruddha finally sets out. He begins by leaving Calcutta and moving into the outer road. The first part of the journey is not yet frightening, it is just as a road trip and he is still in control. As he goes further, he reaches the open rural roads outside the city. The environment changes. The crowded urban world gives way to fields, sky, distance, and silence. This shift is important because the story gradually moves from the familiar to the unfamiliar. Around 1:30 in the afternoon, he stops near Bardhaman for a meal at a restaurant. This stop is small but useful detail because it makes the journey feel real and grounded. Satyajit Ray does not rush into the supernatural. He carefully builds the travel sequence so that the strange events later feel believable. After Bardhaman, he continues his drive and reaches the area near the military camps of Panagar. It is here that he suffers his first major trouble, a flat tire. He manages to change it because he has a spare tire. But even this small problem creates delay and tension. Then the weather begins to change. Soon after the first tire problem, a violent storm strikes. It is described as a nor'wester, or we can say it Kal Baisakhi, which is a sudden and powerful thunderstorm common in eastern India. This storm is one of the most important atmospheric elements in the story. The storm is not just a weather, it is a dramatic force in the narrative. It darkens the sky, frightens the traveler, and pushes him into helplessness. The natural world becomes hostile, and Aniruddha loses the comfort of the routine travel. He continues driving, but the situation becomes worse. On the road to Messenger, he gets a second flat tire. This is the turning point. Unlike the first time, now he has no spare tire left. He is stranded in the middle of nowhere, in the rain, in darkness, with no easy help available. A lorry driver tells him that he has taken the wrong road and that Dumka is only a few miles away, but there are no repair shops nearby. This detail deepens the hopelessness of the situation. Dumka is closed but not reachable. That is exactly the kind of suspense Ray creates. Something is near but not accessible. The storm, the wrong road, and the broken tire all work together to isolate Aniruddha from the world he knows. Because he cannot continue the journey, Aniruddha searches for shelter and reaches an old dark bungalow. A dark bungalow was a rest house used in the colonial period for travelers and officials. This particular bungalow had once belonged to an indigo planter. Th- This detail is extremely important because the bungalow is not simply old, it is historically loaded. It is tied to the British colonial system and the history of indigo cultivation. The moment Aniruddha enters the bungalow, He's entering a place shaped by the past. The atmosphere of the bungalow is eerie. Eerie means strange. Something is wrong there. The bungalow is not simply old. The moment Aniruddha enters the bungalow, he is entering a place shaped by the past. It is lonely, silent, and cut off from the rest of the world. It feels as if time has stopped there. The house seems to preserve a forgotten colonial memory. Satyajit Ray uses this setting brilliantly. The bungalow becomes more than a house, it becomes a symbol of historical residue, a place where old guilt still lingers. To understand the story deeply, one must understand the history behind indigo. During British rule, indigo cultivation became a cruel system of exploitation. British planters forced Indian peasants to grow indigo instead of food crops. The peasants were trapped in debt, pressure, and violence. This created deep suffering in rural Bengal and Bihar. The story does not give a long historical lecture, but the background is essential. The planter whose bungalow Aniruddha enters belonged to the oppressive world. So the story is not only about one ghost or one man, it is about the memory of colonial injustice. This is why Indigo is more than a scary story. It is a story about the way history survives in places, in objects, in atmosphere, and in human consciousness. In between this, you should remember by heart the date on which Aniruddha set out for the trip, which was 27th of April. This date have a very major role in the story. Once inside the bungalow, Aniruddha tries to settle down, but the silence itself becomes frightening. The room feels strange, as if it has a hidden presence. As night falls, the atmosphere grows heavier. He begins to hear the cry of a hound. The sound of the dog creates fear and mystery. It suggests that something alive or once alive is connected to the bungalow. Dogs in ghost stories often signal warning, danger, or a connection to another world. Then Aniruddha notices that things are not normal. His belongings seems missing. The rooms seem changed. Time begins to feel unstable. He is no longer fully sure of what is real. At this point, the story crosses from suspense into the supernatural. The most shocking part of the story is that Aniruddha gradually feels as if he has become the old indigo planter himself. His appearance changes, his body changes, his clothes, voice, and surroundings seems altered. He is no longer simply an observer, he is somehow inside another identity. This transformation is the central mystery of the story. Satyajit Ray never explains it in a scientific or rational way. He leaves it open, which makes the story more powerful. There are several possible ways to read this event. It may be a ghostly possession, it may be a psychological experience caused by fear and suggestion. It may also be symbolic, representing the narrator's entry into the consciousness of colonial guilt. Ray allows all these interpretations to remain possible. What matters is that Aniruddha directly experiences the past instead of merely reading about it. His intellectual interest becomes an emotional, lived experience. The English indigo planter in the story is not just an individual, he is a symbol of the entire colonial system. He represents arrogance, exploitation, cruelty, and guilt. Through this figure, Ray reminds the reader of the dark story behind indigo cultivation. The planter's presence suggests that the victims of exploitation may be gone, but the moral stain remains. His ghostly return is not just a horror device, it is a way of showing that injustice leaves an imprint. The planter's identity also connects the story to ideas of conscience and confession. The past may hide itself, but it does not disappear. The significance of the diary. The diary is one of the most important objects in the story. It is not just a notebook, it is a record of memory, guilt, and hidden truth. It acts like almost like a confession from the past. In a story, a diary often serves as a proof that the supernatural event is connected to human memory and emotion. Here, the diary helps deepen the moral meaning of the story. It suggests that the planter had thoughts, fears, and perhaps remorse. This gives the story a stronger emotional layer. It is not only about a haunted building, it is about conscience, history, and the burden of wrongdoing. The major symbols. Now, let us understand the major symbols in the story. The story symbolizes disruption, fear, and the breaking of the normal world. The wrong road symbolizes how one can unknowingly move from present into the past. The dark bungalow symbolizes the colonial past that still survives physically and psychologically. The hound symbolizes warning, mystery, and the presence of something hidden. The diary symbolizes memory, confession, and truth. The indigo planter symbolizes colonial oppression and guilt. Together, these symbols make the story much richer than a simple ghost tale. Now, you should remember that the date mentioned before, 27th of April, was the same date on which the indigo planter by whom the body of Aniruddha is possessed had died before 100 or 200 before 100 years ago. Okay, so you may also relate the position of Aniruddha with that event, because as it was the same date when he died, this must be the reason for possessing Aniruddha. The story has several important themes. The first is the haunting power of history. The past does not stay buried, it returns, especially when it contains pain and injustice. The second is colonial exploitation. The story reminds us of the suffering of peasants under the Indigo system. The third is identity and transformation. Aniruddha's identity becomes unstable, and that makes the story psychologically powerful. The fourth is fear and suspense. Ray creates tension very slowly and skillfully. The fifth is guilt and moral memory. The story suggests that wrongdoing leaves behind a permanent stain. By the end of the story, Aniruddha returns to himself. The strange experience ends, but he is deeply disturbed. He cannot forget what happened. The ending is powerful because it does not give a neat explanation. Instead, it leaves the reader with uncertainty. Was it a ghost? Was it a dream? Was it imagination? Was it the past entering the present? Ray does not fully answer these questions, and that is the part of the story's brilliance. The real point is not to prove the ghost scientifically. The real point is to show that colonial cruelty and historical pain do not vanish easily. They remain alive in memory, place, and feeling. If you are writing the story in an exam, these are the points you must remember. Aniruddha Bose is the first person narrator. He is 29 years old and works in an advertising agency. He also writes stories and is deeply interested in Indigo history. His trip to Dumka is delayed first by an old family friend and then by Bhola Babu's interruption. Bhola Babu advised him to arrange for a driver. He travels through Calcutta, the rural roads, Bardhaman, Panagar, and Masanjor. He gets two flat tires and the second one leaves him stranded. The storm and the wrong road led him to the old dark bungalow. The bungalow once belonged to an English indigo planter. The story mixes history, mystery, supernatural fear, and colonial guilt. The diary, hound, storm, and bungalow are important symbols. The ending shows the haunting power of the past. So, Indigo by Satyajit Ray is a story that works on many levels. It is exciting, scary, historical, and deeply meaningful. It shows us how a simple journey can turn into a connection with the past, and how a lonely bungalow can become a place where history speaks through fear. What makes the story special is that Ray never wastes a single detail. Every interruption, every stop, every road, every sound, and every object has a purpose. That is why this story is so useful for exams and also so memorable as literature. If you study this explanation carefully, you will be able to write a strong answer on the story, its plot, its themes, its character, and its symbolism. The key is to remember that Indigo is not only about a ghost, it is about the lingering power of history and the guilt of colonial exploitation. Thank you for watching.